Well, thanks for coming back. Again, I'm Tom Carrico, Senior Fellow here in the Defense and Security Department and the Director of the Missile Defense Project. We're closing out our day strong with 5 of the Vice Chiefs of Staff. This panel is going to be moderated by Dr. Seth Jones. He's the President of the Defense and Security Department here of CSIS and author of The American Edge from Oxford on the American Defense Industrial Base. He's my boss as well, so I have to mention that. Look, the Secretary of Defense has indicated his intent to have some pretty significant changes. Recent memos on software, Army transformation. Of course, we've seen an executive order on shipbuilding, lots of other things, and that's probably going to mean some big shifts to the program of record. I'll say as well, this is a reprise of the panel from last year, which was quite a hit. So I think we'll just turn it over to you, Seth. You've got your hands full. This will be a good one. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Tom. Just want to thank everybody else for staying till the best panel of the day. So I wanted to start off with kind of a big picture question, starting off with General Mahoney. And one of the interesting things that has come up over the course of the day, several members of Congress spent a chunk of time talking about this, certainly Senator McConnell, among others, is the evolving global landscape that we have. So we've got cooperation in Russia with the Chinese, the North Koreans and the Iranians providing assistance. Interesting developments in the Red Sea where we've got Chinese and Russian assistance to the Iranians and the Houthis. So we're seeing that in multiple theaters. And the question for you from a Marine Corps perspective as you look at this, this cooperation is, what are the implications for you as you look across this of force posture, force employment, and other issues across theaters? What are the implications for the Marine Corps? And then we'll get to other people's perspectives as well. But, I mean, very interesting evolution of the security environment.
Yeah, thanks. And I guess I'll see if I can start big and then kind of end up small at the operational level. But the way I look at it now, 2-3 years ago, we did not talk about this cooperation, this collusion. We kind of said, we are the allies and partners force. We've got paper to prove it. Over years post-World War II, and kind of didn't recognize, or it wasn't apparent, that there were burgeoning relationships building that were just described. So I think we have to admit to it, discuss it, and analyze it, and not underemphasize what's going on. In particular, people parts and projectiles being given from the person who needs it, the country that needs it, from one who can supply it. That sounds a lot like an alliance sort of thing to me. So while it may not be a formalized agreement, it is happening, and I believe it will continue to happen. So bring it down a level. We're arranged around the world and have been in a COCOM arrangement that doesn't deny that reality, but is not lined up specifically to it. So that would be something going forward that we could look at through the UCP. And rely on maybe a more formal relationship, more formal exchanges between the COCOMs, or an alignment, a different alignment. Getting lower, I think you have to immediately believe that if there is a fight in one geographic area, because of these relationships, they will immediately metastasize or have a geographic and geopolitical protraction. It can't be avoided. So, well, if you want to have a short, sharp one in 100 miles straight, what we're seeing demonstrated is that will immediately have impact globally. And you've got to structure your force, depending on how serious you are about being a global force, to provide for those eventualities. So now at the operational level for the Marine Corps, we have got to be within striking distance of several different places at the time, and I do that with my shipmate Jim Kilby here, and have the capabilities to hedge against those eventualities that we think will happen. Well, it wasn't meant to happen in the Bab el-Mandeb. It was meant to happen in some other geographic area. We've got to have an answer for these other eventualities around the world. Due once again, I think, to the cooperation and the alliance-like relationships that we see in action right now.
So from an Army perspective, General Mingus, how do you see things either differently or similarly? And you can disagree, by the way, with the Marine Corps. That's okay here.
Never. Jim Kilby, yes, but never Mo. Never Mo. So the relationships are not new. The level of cooperation is new. The sharing of technology is new and concerning, and we have to watch that. When you look at what Iran has given to Russia now is mass-producing UAVs and one-man attack drones at a rate that we have not seen in a long time. So this sharing of technology, we have to be very concerned about that. But we fight as a joint force. We never fight alone. And the joint force, the United States joint force, is a pretty formidable force. Most lethal fighting machine on the face of the planet, and we ought to be expected, our country ought to expect us to be able to do more than one thing at one time. Inside the land force, we are, like the rest of us, we are optimizing for the Indo-PACOM scenario, but we know that there's the world you want to live in, and then there's the world you really live in, and we have to be prepared for those two.
So I wonder, going to the Navy, Admiral Kilby, you could certainly weigh in on this, but I do want to shift a little bit. Coming from the Indo-Pacific recently, one of the things that was interesting in flying a P-8 through the region is the amount of red in the area of the South China Sea, East China Sea, Taiwan Strait. The Chinese certainly have mass and scale in that area. One of the issues that we discussed this morning was on the issue of offsets. U.S. at various points with the Soviets during the Cold War looked at ways to offset some Soviet advantages in numbers, in some cases in Europe, both of the 50s with Eisenhower and then the 70s and 80s with Carter and Reagan. So what do you, as you look at the PLA Navy and their actions and their industrial-based mobilization, where does the U.S. have advantages? How do we keep those advantages over time?
Well, great question, Seth. I do want to comment, though, on what Mo and Jim said. We need to view this as a global problem all the time. And the Navy this year will do its first third time, a thing called large-scale exercise. Happens in August, where we have the three four-star fleet commanders working to solve a problem and understand what happens here could have an impact on me, and coordinating through their combatant commands. So to me, that's an acknowledgement that this is the place we're in. There's also a bit of transparency between UCP lines to Mo's point, where we need to be able to do handoffs and retain custody of assets, particularly submarine assets. So to me, that is being actively worked. To your specific question about what can we do from a mass perspective, one of our focus areas, we've got 5. One is long-range fires, counter-5 CSRT or counter-targeting, terminal defense, protecting our ships, contested logistics, and the 5th one is called non-traditional sea denial. So that's using unmanned assets in a way that presents a dilemma for the adversary. And last week, I was out with Admiral Paparo and Admiral Kaler as we were looking at some of these things and the control of them and how we would mask them. So I'll leave it at that, but that can apply to any theater. Just like I would say the force design concept for the Marine Corps could apply to any theater, and we shouldn't buttonhole the Marine Corps to this specific problem, though it's certainly got a focus area of them. To me, that's extensible anywhere. So is this capability. So geography matters. I get a little vexed when people say, hey, can you take what they're doing in the Black Sea and apply it to the Pacific? Well, it's a different scope and scale, but I think in some cases it could apply. So using those things in a manner where we can create dilemmas for our adversary is what we're pursuing.
So on this particular topic, General Ployce, how's the Air Force thinking about this, and including in reaction to PLA, Air Force, and Rocket Force activity? How are you thinking about it, and how are you thinking about it in a joint perspective?
I think the biggest change over what we've done in the Middle East for really the last 25 years from an Air Force perspective, working with our joint partners on the ground, was right now you favor agility, you favor speed, you favor tempo, and you favor flexibility. So in other words, if China is the pacing threat, you have to be able to do that, but you can't just buy kit that solves that dilemma. There's another fight that's going to happen someplace else on the globe, and we don't get to pick where that is. And so what we've come at, much like the Marine Corps has, we've come at a new force design. It's called One Force Design for the Air Force. And what we've done is we've looked at it from kind of 3 different mission areas. And the first mission area is based on usually right after conflict starts, and we are in a contested environment both on the ground and in the air. And I say that from an air perspective, that when I talk about a ground threat, that's my ability to land airplanes, refuel them, reload them, and launch them again. And that is a contested environment. You also have the air threat, which is just air superiority 101. So we've looked at that first mission area and looked specifically at how we can use the flexibility, agility that we need by providing mass, by providing quick opportunities to lower the threat, both ground and air. And we're also looking at things that are very hard to detect. And that's kind of our first mission area. Our second mission area is, once I've gotten the threat to come down, the ground threat and the air threat, I can now bring in more of the platforms that have range and they have speed and ability to penetrate. And then the third area is really what you would consider kind of our traditional forces. And that's the mass that we can bring, and that is what is going to help provide that cover for the joint force from an air superiority standpoint. That's really kind of where we're focusing our efforts.
So have your views, planning on agile combat employment, or ACE, evolved over time as the capabilities of adversaries have evolved?
Yeah, I think ACE, Agile Combat Employment, I was around when we first came up with the idea of it, and we've evolved quite a bit because we've done lots and lots of exercises. As Admiral Kilby said, we also are doing service-wide exercise this summer. It's called RE4PAC. It's going to be held out in the Pacific, and it is all of the United States Air Force with some joint partners that are playing in it as well. And what we've found is every time we do it, we get better at it. And hopefully that is also not just we're getting better at it from a standpoint of reps and sets, but it's more importantly that we also understand some of the contested logistics requirements for it, as well as the command and control.
So I want to go to the gray zone, Admiral, and bring the Coast Guard in and ask you a question about how you're thinking about sort of gray zone activity. You know, interesting, back to the Indo-Pacific theater, when you look at a lot of the vessels that the Chinese are putting out, maritime militia, Coast Guard vessels, fishing vessels, there's a lot of gray zone activity. We certainly see this with the Russians and their use of the Ghost Fleet in the Baltics, for example, cutting fiber optic cables, and Chinese have done the same thing around Taiwan and islands like Kinmen. So from your perspective, how are you thinking about analyzing and then addressing sort of the gray zone threat and the Coast Guard's role in that?
Yeah, Seth, maybe just acknowledging up front the differences in the United States Coast Guard with our DoD colleagues here. So under DHS, we have a primary mission to control, secure, and if necessary, defend U.S. borders, maritime, and approaches, including an expansive EEZ in the Indo-Pacific that includes U.S. territories as well. That said, we view our role in the Indo-Pacific as also being critical. We are a proud member of the joint force that integrates with DoD. I can give you a few examples of Coast Guard units that are operating under DoD TACON in the Indo-Pacific as we speak. Now that said, we have a special capability in that we're a hybrid organization, law enforcement, military, regulatory, and there are a whole host of allies and partners in theater who just demand U.S. Coast Guard services, engagements, presence, and capacity building. So we help Coast Guards and maritime constabularies in and around the Indo-Pacific build their own capacity to counter those kind of threats. We also have Coast Guard units that reinforce the rules-based order, maritime, that we all seek to defend. And we're really in high demand in that regard.
Sounds good. And as a reminder to people in the audience and online too, please ask questions. I've got the tablet up here, so in a little bit we'll get to some audience questions, and happy to ask them from here. All right, General Mingus, you guys put out the Army Transformation Initiative. So in addition to what has been stated publicly, how are you thinking about implementation now?
Thanks, Seth. You really have to go back several months, and if you've listened to the Secretary of the Chief, myself, as we've talked in forums like this, in testimony, we've been communicating the need to transform at a much more rapid pace than we have. We just didn't call it ATI until here recently. We're excited about it. In the genesis, when we started our transformation in contact, most in the room have probably heard of TIC 1.0, TIC 2.0, infusing the most up-to-date stuff into our formations that are out there, learning from bottom up, the recognition that we actually can go much faster than we have been over the last couple of years. The other thing that we had to recognize is that, and it's not germane just to the Army, but the Department of Defense's budget has not moved a whole lot over the last 4 or 5 years. And if you look at the last decade, it's not moved much in there as well. Meanwhile, operating costs, executive agent costs, cost of living, all those things have continued to rise at a rate that is outpacing the movement of our top line. So we recognize this, but the last thing we wanted to do is start to go into our maneuver formations. You have end strength and structure, you have training and modernization, or training, and then you have modernization. Which one of those buckets do you want to go after to right size so that you can live within your means? And for us, we decided to go after headquarters. We decided to go after things that we know are not going to be relevant in the next fight. All of those are difficult, all of them are hard, because they have things that are out there. They mean jobs to certain people, but we in the Army and the Land Force decided that we need to go after things we actually are going to need in the next fight. We would rather reduce the size of staffs and headquarters and merge those kinds of things than go after maneuver formations. What we think we are going to be able to do over the course of the next year is not just accelerate, but go after some of the things that we have been trying to do for the last couple of years. And so that implementation is going to begin this summer.
Sounds good. Well, we look forward to hearing more about that. Let me turn to a subject we started to touch on a little bit, but I want to get into the issue and start off with General Mahoney and then bring in the Air Force as part of this discussion is protracted war. One of the interesting components of the war in Ukraine, as we're now past the 3-year mark, we're into year 4, is this prospect of protracted conventional conflict. And so the question is, how is the Marine Corps thinking about protracted conflict? It could be munitions, stockpiles to ensure you have enough. How do you do contested logistics in a protracted conflict? What are the overall implications for something that may not last days or weeks or even months, but potentially years?
Yeah, the idea of a short, sharp conflict, I think, is a fantasy. It just simply, in today's geopolitical environment, the relationships we talked about earlier, it just will not happen. So protraction in time, protraction geographically, I think militates for another phrase that we've been using, which is depth of magazine. When I talk about depth of magazine, I don't just mean munitions. I mean people. I mean the support for those munitions. I mean budgets that will follow it over time. Now there are some mundane, things like stockpiling, pre-positioning, and making sure that your program is aimed at accelerating when the time comes. But I think first it is you build into your design the fact that you will not be able to turn this on and turn it off, because it's going to go on for a period of time, once again, that will demand all the levers of resourcing in order to succeed.
And if I could jump in here, Seth, we've all talked about this. And all of us are investing both in the defense and the organic industrial base. We need to build up that magazine depth, as Mo talked about, but only to a certain point because of the affordability associated with it. The key in all this is in the modernization of both our defense industrial base and our organic industrial base is the automation of the plants that we have that are out there. I think we talked about this last year, our path to get to 100,000 rounds a month in 155. And we're still on that path, but it's taken us a year to get there. We, in a time of crisis and conflict, have to be able to get there in days, months, not years. Robots can work 24 hours a day or 14 hours a day. So the people are still part of the equation, but the automation and the use of robotics and the use of automation in our plants that are out there so that you can scale very, very rapidly is going to be the key at the end state of all this.
So where, if I can just ask a question that's a follow-up, where do you see still some of the resistance in the system for increasing our ability to surge? Is it in the contract and acquisition system? Is it something else? Is it in the CR, the congressional resolution tailspin we're in right now? What are some of the issues and hurdles you've got to work through?
I think it's all the above. I mean, every time we've talked, the notion of building up that magazine depth is important. The mechanics of getting there, it's a lot of all that. In our case, we've laid in $18 billion over the course of the next 15 years to modernize our organic industrial base. We would like to do that faster. When you're dealing with, not this year in particular, but year after year after year of continuing resolutions, that does, and we can come back to that if you want to hit the importance, because I know we have emotions there, but it's all the above.
Let me jump on the scrum here. From the way we look at reform and refinement, we tend to stovepipe what we're talking about. Hey, we need to refine our requirements. We need to drive the variance out, tell industry what they need, and stick with it. That's only part of the story. We also have to reform and refine the acquisition portion of that equation, as well as the resourcing portion. All three of those things, from requirements to resources to acquisition, if you don't deal with them all, I'm not naive enough to think that you can reform all of them at the same time, but if you believe you're going to get a result from refining your requirements process, in the absence of the other two legs of the bar stool, you won't get much advantage out of that. It has to be taken more holistically, if not treated holistically.
And
if that makes sense.
And that link in the middle between requirements and acquisition, making sure that when you actually deliver, it's what the warfighter needs.
So what if
I want to add, I do think there's an opportunity space here, right? Because we, for a long time, have, at least in the Navy, funded to minimum sustaining rate. That's what we had to do to keep the line open and keep it going. That's not sufficient, as we've seen with all the munitions we've expended in the Red Sea. Similarly, from a requirements view, and I've been in the space the whole time I've been in the Pentagon, I'm taking a little bit of a more open view here, that maybe something is better than nothing. So we've looked at new entrants, coming up with competing munitions that may not have the same spec or requirement as a preferred munition, but might be pretty helpful. So if you think of that in the space of the Red Sea, I could use a cheaper munition that's not quite as effective against a lesser threat. I often tell a story about directed energy, where when I was Yen 9, I was looking at 500 kilowatts to 1 megawatt to knock down an anti-ship cruise missile. Boy, do I have regret on that now, right? If I had been a little more thoughtful, because I thought I was being a good steward of the requirement, and all these lesser included offenses would be captured if I was able to deliver there, I probably missed an opportunity. So I think looking at that differently is a place that we all ought to go, because we have limited capacity now. So there may be some ability to look a little broader than we've looked at before. And again, I may not get the probability of kill of that missile that I get out of this missile, but it might be good enough.
So I wonder if we can bring in the Air Force and General Ploys. I did not let you know this, but your comrades up here voted you the prankster of the group.
Really?
So, yeah. So
Guess the prank's on me.
Yeah, I guess so. I wonder if you can give your perspective from the and part of the question. This could be for any service. War games we've done here, war games that have been done elsewhere. There is, among other challenges, a munitions challenge and a protracted conflict, including your long-range anti-ship missiles, JASM, including extended range. So how are you thinking about that and dealing with it?
I think one of the biggest lessons learned you can take out of Ukraine is the importance of air superiority. And since neither Russia nor Ukraine has been able to establish air superiority, either side, what you end up is in a protracted war. And you're just going to keep lobbing things at each other, and you're going to move lines on the ground, as an army moves in one direction, or as a Marine maneuver unit moves in another direction. And so The other lesson that I would say that you can take from specifically the Ukraine side of the house is you have changed I would argue you have changed the nature of war when a $50 drone paired up against a $3 million missile changes the cost curve. And that gets back to the conversation about how do you keep a magazine in depth good enough. Well, if you're buying $50 drones and you're shooting them with $3 million missiles, you're going to run out of magazine before they run out of magazine. The second thing is that the defense industrial base has got to start using the new terms that we have to have in today's society for agility and flexibility and speed. And so we traditionally create a program of record. We create requirements, we make out a big document for it, we spend years trying to come up with it, we finally get it to get built, we finally put it into test, then we get it on the airplane, and then we're able to utilize it. The Ukrainians went from nothing to making 15,000 one-way UAVs inside of a year. That is per month. That is insane. And the reason I bring that concept up is the nature of war is continuing to change, and they didn't make it a program of record and then go, okay, now we're just going to buy these same drones over and over and over again. They evolve. Every time somebody changes the tactic, you have to be able to pivot and evolve and change your tactics. And so I would see that as we move forward from an Air Force perspective, we're trying to work with on our acquisition side of the house to make sure that we are building flexibility into the next generation of our weapons so that we are not stuck immediately with something that is, frankly, can be outdated by the time it fields.
Hey, for Rolls, the only thing harder than making a program of record is killing a program of record. So he's getting at this, don't wed yourself to that. I got to be able to pivot fast and discard this thing that's no longer of relative use and adopt this new thing. That is different thinking, and that is squarely in this area of non-traditional sea denial, where you're not wedded to this thing because of humans in it, right? So that provides opportunity.
You know, one of the interesting thing that comes out, I don't know if how much you've been thinking about this or what the challenges are. They could be cultural, bureaucratic, even legal to some degree. You know, having seen the Ukrainians, my last visit there, one of the other interesting things, in addition to the speed and agility, is how they've done a reasonable job of connecting the warfighter to the commercial sector that is helping them think through what types of drones or drones components or how do they figure on the drones, how do they go longer range, or higher payload, or how do they think about EW. So there's a constant back and forth with forward deployed forces and a commercial sector that's also trying to help resolve the situation that's very dynamic. And you know, that's not quite the way one does business in a peacetime environment, but in a wartime environment is different. I don't know to what degree you've been dealing with this on the Marine Corps side?
We have. I think if you look at convergence, if you look at overmatch, if you look at ABMS, you will see an overlap of the same types of folks and a lot of the same types of vendors. And in those experimentations and those exercises, there's a give and take. And I don't think there has ever been a technological barrier that couldn't be taken down as a result of that conversation. But you got to keep it going. Just going back, I think, to the surge idea. If you have a program that's reasonably funded, if your fiscal position is reasonable and you can move around a little bit, what I have seen, and I used to be the old budget guy, is we wouldn't bump up against technology. We wouldn't bump up against the discussion between the vendor and the military. In other words, a requirement would be satisfied. What we would bump up against was, look, is the amount we can build. We can't build any more. I would have to build a new line. I would have to hire new people. So the depth, range and depth of the defense industrial base, not technology, it seems to be one of the bigger limb facts right now in giving us an ability to surge.
And we're guilty of that. Remember, we conditioned them to be at minimum sustaining rate. We engendered that behavior.
But the good thing is, I think we're not walking by it anymore, though.
Yeah.
You know, if Ukraine was a referendum on depth of magazine, And now we have this new understanding. We need to get serious about how we do that. And whether it's barriers to entry, whether it's contracting authorities that we have, whether it is manufacturing automation, all of those things in order to keep pace or to catch up.
So we're
Well-
talking, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, Mo and I both drive elderly trucks.
I didn't say that, by the way.
Mo's might be just a little bit older than mine, but we park next to each other in the parking lot.
2001 was a good year.
Someday our wives are going to let us go buy a new truck. But imagine if you walked onto that lot and you were buying the same truck that you bought 10 years ago. When it comes to robotics, unmanned systems, we should be of the same mindset. We buy 1,000 from the best vendor this year, but next year there's going to be a better version. And so instead of the traditional vendor lock that you're wed to for 10, 20 years in the program of record kind of space, we ought to be recompeting that every year. And even for our major platforms. So we're going to roll out the E3, which is the next tank. That's a hardware-centric platform. But the guts of that thing is all software pathways. We ought to be able to pull everything from a technological standpoint out of that thing and wholesale replace every year or 2 or 3, and those soft grade upgrades are happening all the time. So even with major platforms, the software pathways keeps you relevant.
Yeah, you want to
Yeah,
jump
maybe just following a theme, I think we have survived with lots of constraints over the years, and now we have an opportunity to examine what constraints just don't serve us anymore. I mean, quite frankly, I feel like our acquisition approaches have been more focused on compliance with rules than they have been outcomes that serve operators. So now we have an opportunity. We've actually proposed legislation on the Hill to remove some of the things, the checks and balances and other things that have held us back. We're looking at executive actions that we can take in order to alleviate some of these requirements and oversight of the Coast Guard acquisition program so we can be a lot more nimble moving forward.
I think I'm sensing that really writ large. I'll give you 2 examples. I start out with one, which is a Marine Corps Navy example, the LSM, which is a ship designed to support force design. We set a requirement, the RFP went out, the comeback from industry came in, it was over cost. So we're looking at those requirements now and figuring out a bridging solution to help the Marine Corps advance, but end up with the vehicle we want, the vessel we want. And so to me, that's a good news story about being kind of willing to pivot and not wedded to this thing. You know, my history has been, we have 3 things: cost, schedule, performance. So we typically lock down schedule and performance, which means cost goes through the roof. What if I'm a little bit more thoughtful about the performance piece as we go through this and I understand what's acceptable or what's not acceptable? Now we're in a more reasonable conversation. And I think, to Pete's point, we haven't always been there because we've been wedded to the compliance part of this and the structure that got us there. Can't do that anymore.
So I wonder, you've got the floor right now, Admiral Kilby, if we could turn to shipbuilding.
Yeah.
So a couple of areas that are a priority right now for the U.S. administration. We saw folks here would have seen the executive order on restoring America's maritime dominance. Can you talk a little bit about the Navy's shipbuilding priorities now in light of the emphasis now on shipbuilding? And then the second part of that is also what role and how are you thinking about allies and partners, Koreans, Japanese, others, as part of shipbuilding?
Sure. A couple of things. One, I won't talk about the massive capability that China has other than to say they can build 200 times our rate. 200 times our rate. So we should all take pause on that and understand that. And we made a decision as a nation to emphasize other areas. So now there's an opportunity to rebalance. And I see tremendous opportunity when you look at the conversation at the White House, from a White House shipbuilding office, from various acts that are being proposed by Congress, to OSD, to the Navy. There's an alignment piece here that I had not seen before. So I'm super enthusiastic about that. For us, and I would just say we have a new Secretary of the Navy. He's a businessman, and he just came back from a trip overseas looking at those yards to understand what their view is compared to our view. And we're going to have a lot of conversations to that end state. we're not satisfied with our current production from our yards. We need to do better. And there's a lot of reasons for that. We can go to in some of those, but from planning to execution to meeting the timelines to workforce generation and training to supplier base, all those things need to come to bear. And we're making investments in the maritime industrial base and the submarine industrial base that I think we need to be patient and let those catch and apply an output. It's not going to be instantaneous, but I am seeing specific examples of improvements, 100% in some companies that are now able, through that investment, to facilitate and increase their delivery. We also need to look at other markets. So if I'm going to go to a hybrid fleet, which we are, then what vendors can do that? Why would I limit the productivity of those to the yards that are already overburdened? Let's go somewhere else to do that. And by the way, if I have a requirement, because there's a human not in that, this is a danger for us, is to overbuild the requirement. I need to keep it cheap so it is attritable and expendable. So there's an imperative to do that. So SIB and MIB investments need to happen in addition to all the other stuff. And finally, I will just end with a little ray of hope. 2 weeks ago, I went to a place, and I wrote down the acronym here so I wouldn't get it wrong, but it's the Accelerated Training for Defense Manufacturing facility in Danville, Virginia. So this is a place, this is a mill town that went under in the 70s. They reinvented themselves into a tech hub, and they have a school for 5 disciplines. So additive manufacturing, welding, QA, and then I always call it CNC, but subtractive manufacturing, where I bore out a piece of aluminum or some other metal to get a part. And they train 3 8-hour sessions a day for 16 weeks. When that is on pace, we'll have 1,900 or 900 graduates a year at a 90% placement in our defense industrial base. So there's a human capital piece of this too. In that same facility, there's a additive manufacturing center of excellence that takes parts and does the printing, so we have the intellectual property. Now we have another process to generate that part. So I've got to sync up naval supply with that, to look at that as an opportunity and not as a secondary source if there's no part in the system. In the case of a part I held, and I didn't bring it with me because it's a couple pounds and I didn't want to be overly excessive with my
you want to show
folks
off your
here.
strength?
I didn't want to take
I would have carried it.
I didn't want to take Rolls' job here, but it's a hanger bracket for a DDG. And when that hanger bracket failed, we went to the supply system, 40 weeks. We went to the Additive Manufacturing Center of Excellence. We gave them the prints. They put it in the system. They designed a template. We fitted it, and we produced it in 19 days. If I did that again today for another bracket, 5 days. So that's the kind of things we have to look at, workforce and skill set. And these disciplines are not, smelters. There are people operating computers to design a part at a very high specification. So we need to do that all over our country. You know, we used to have, when I was entered the Navy, about 30% of our workforce was manufacturing, was it kind of the direct labor force. Now it's 11%. So my son is going to welding school at Northern Virginia Community College. I'm like, hell yeah, you're going to go to this place and it's going to make you a better welder. That should be okay for us. We need to decide as a nation that that's okay for us.
So one interesting, this came up earlier in the day.
So all that for shipbuilding.
All that.
Okay.
Right? And carrying the rucksack for everybody else too.
That's right.
Thank you.
So one follow-on question along those lines, and this came up earlier in the day on surge capacity. Actually, this was Arthur Herman in his Freedom Forge discussion this morning. Is how do you think about, on the workforce issue, because you mentioned it, things like housing prices?
Yeah.
How do we get, if you look at a number of places where we're building ships, and then I want to bring the Coast Guard in a moment just to get your shipbuilding perspective, there are additional challenges. So, how do we communicate to individuals that going to college is not the only option that you have? There are other fantastic patriotic pathways that you can go to vocational school, learn a trade, and be a welder, or be an electrician, or be a pipe fitter, and do your patriotic duty for the country, and that's a good thing. So there's that element. There's also that cost of living for some of these are tough. If you're living around Bath, building destroyers, or Groton, building subs, those are not cheap places to live.
Well, there's a COVID effect there too, specifically in Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, where when COVID happened, people moved out of Boston and they displaced a lot of people around those areas. So there's an effect there that we need to figure out and make it okay and reasonable to not have to drive to work at 3 in the morning, park in a parking lot and go to sleep, wake up to just get a parking space and get on with life. So to me, we definitely have to address that, Seth, because people are going to want to work in a place that they're valued, they can contribute, they feel self-worth, and they're treated like a varsity athlete. That's what we got to do here. And we're trying to do that across all our services with our sailors, airmen, soldiers, Marines, guardsmen, to recruit them. And we're all fighting that fight, but we ought to have a similar thing with our workforce. And if a sailor, a recruit can't make it through boot camp, well, let's help them on their next path. You know, we have a school in Great Lakes where if you can't do whatever, can't jump off the 10-meter board, can't do whatever, you go to a thing that used to be called separations. Now you go to a place called the Phoenix Barracks. We're going to help you figure out your next life, where social workers help them connect those dots. That's an investment in them. And that's the investment we need to make. So to me, we just got to be more thoughtful. It's not disposable.
Just maybe an exclamation point on that. We put 25,000 former Marines on the street every year. At Pascagoula Shipyard, there are 315 what we would call MOSs, specialties. It's not just welders. It's not just pipe fitters or boilermakers. There's a wide range of skill sets that's required to build a ship and put it in the water. If there were a more direct connection, incentive, interest between those skill sets, not all of them are at Pascagoula, by the way, they feed Pascagoula, and motivated, disciplined, skilled humans that we put on the street every year, that would be a vector to take to help out in a different way what Jim is talking about.
Yeah, one of the guys I met at the CNC thing was a former Marine who got a head wound in Fallujah and was medically retired. Boom. He's remaking himself in this opportunity.
Is there such thing as a former Marine?
No. Well, probably not.
Well, no, Dakota Meyer, he figured that out. He's back in the Marine Corps now.
Okay.
He was a former Marine.
Okay.
Before you go to the Coast Guard, Seth, if I come back to the advanced manufacturing and 3D printing and all that, because we're all investing in the technology and the capability. We recently bought the largest 3D printer in the world inside of our Army Material Command, and we're echeloning that down. You don't want that at the tactical edge. But the end result, though, for industry that's out there, we are going to increasingly demand the right to repair, the tech data, the CADS drawings, all the things that go with that as part of those early on negotiations as we enter into new systems that we bring online. In the end, it will help us all, but most importantly, at the edge in the middle of a fight when you can't wait the 60 or how many weeks, for in our case, sometimes we have a year plus long lead time parts. We can't afford to do that anymore. We need to be able to repair that stuff immediately.
How are you thinking about the shipbuilding and all the rest of it?
I mean, there's a lot of great wisdom here, but on the shipbuilding front, I mean, Admiral Kilby's exactly right. We are way behind and we need to accelerate, but there's cause to be optimistic. For example, Joint Program Office on building icebreakers, we've turned a page on that, and we now have a negotiated new contract with a pretty good schedule and cost renegotiated, and they're moving out very smartly. The shipyard, unfortunately, most of the shipyards that are building Coast Guard ships are within a couple-hour drive from each other, so they're competing with the same workforce. But Bollinger, Mississippi is, they are recruiting in the communities and across America, and they're doing their own training, and I think we're seeing this across industries in the United States. Is in a tight labor market, they're taking this personally upon themselves and not waiting for folks to come to them. They're going out and doing the training and the development, and they're providing the kind of workplace that people want to work in at a decent wage where you don't have to have a college education. We're doing really well at Austral Shipbuilding with our Phase 2 offshore patrol cutter. We just started cutting steel on our Waterways Commerce cutter. in Alabama. So cause to be optimistic, but I tell you, one of the key things here and where we need continued support for Congress is you talk to shipbuilders, and what they ask for are steady order books. They need consistent funding over long periods of time so they can invest in the equipment and the training of the people, and they're not on the cyclical layoff and rehire, which is one reason we feel like it's budget reconciliation could be incredibly promising for the Coast Guard.
Yeah, I don't know if some of you want to weigh in. We've talked a little bit about congressional, the CR, so how big of a challenge is that here?
Well, this is the first time, Mo's been, he's the green eye shade guy, but this is the first time we've had a full year CR. So it's a little bit uncharted waters for us. We all become pretty proficient at partial year CRs, which encourages bad behavior to get through that. And we almost are thinking it's going to happen instead of being righteously indignant that it doesn't happen. But a full year CR is different. I think we have authorities, though, that are allowing us to get after the most important thing, which are readiness of platforms, people, and munitions. Those are my focus areas. So we've got to kind of come through it and get at it. Reconciliation is helpful in that it gives me things I don't have in my budget, but I've got to sustain those things in the future, right? So you want a budget which comes back to, I need to have a budget that supports the Navy the nation needs. So that's readiness dollars, people, repair money, OMIN, all those things have to happen to maintain that fleet so it can do what you want it to do when required.
I don't think there's been a service chief or a vice that's ever stood in front of Congress and when they ask, what can we do to help?
You tell them a CR?
Almost every time they'll tell you predictable,
Predictable.
on-time funding. 18 of the last 20 years, we've had a CR, this year being the exception where we've got a year-long CR. So it has become the norm. We were recently together talking about this. Every taxpayer in the United States of America should be screaming at the top of their lungs. Because when you're in that CR, the thing that's hidden, because we oftentimes get asked how many programs are affected, how many new starts couldn't you do, and all the other programmatic side. But the toughest part about it is the loss of buying power.
Yeah.
10 to 20% of your buying power is gone the minute you're in a CR. Now, this one that took us to the end of the year gave us some flexibility in it, so that one's not quite as extreme, but in a normal CR, so everybody's heard the 961 billion or 1 trillion, just do the math. That's somewhere between $100 and $200 billion that we are not able to spend in an adequate way. That ought to be enough to get us all fired up.
There's not a whole lot more to add. I know
The
of
Army
no,
said it all? Is that what you're saying?
I know of no household, I know of no industry, no business that could survive year to year with a budget plan that goes forward, but looking back over their shoulder to execute at the previous year's cash flow. You can't modernize, you can't manage your talent, you can't increase your logistics. All those things are hampered, and they all carry a monetization that is profound, that you just don't see at the top line. Now, thankfully this year, like Jim said, there is some flexibility built into it, but the model of looking backwards doesn't say accelerate to me. The model of last year's cash flow doesn't say, hey, where's the ability to surge? Not good.
Only because we all lived this together last year, but it's not out of the norm. But we typically submit our budget June, a year and a half, almost 2 years out. You'll see assuming like we have 18 out of the last 20 years, you get an appropriations in the March, April timeframe. You are now into what we call immediate mid-year review. You have to do an omnibus reprogramming because fact of life from when you submitted your budget and all the things that changed over the course of that 20 months or so, your money is misaligned. So you do the omnibus reprogramming, and last year we saw that reprogramming come back into our coffers the second, third week in September. And here you go, 2 weeks to execute.
So I wonder if I could bring in...
I will say that I don't think China's doing that.
I think that's pretty safe to say China is not doing that.
I haven't seen continuing resolution mentioned in the Chinese.
I'm actually quite sure they're pretty happy with a series of continuing resolutions. But question for you, this is from the audience. So first question, start off with the Air Force, and then if others want to weigh in, you can do that. What are the skills you most need to recruit for now? What skills do your forces lack that you need more of? And how do you anticipate future force needs will evolve in the next decade or so?
I think that off the top, I think the people that we want to recruit are people that are motivated and patriotic. That right there carries a lot of weight in the services, in all of our services. We also need people that are fit, that have a warrior ethos, and that they want to join a group of teammates, shipmates, that our job is to execute the nation's wars, and they have to know that coming in. Where you get into some of the soft skills, I would say, are things like software capabilities, so that they understand coding. This isn't a new concept. They understand commodity-based procurement. They understand allies and partners. They understand that we will never fight by ourselves, but we always have to be able to do it if required. And I think we've got we've all seen a surge in our recruiting numbers over the past few months. And I think that is reflected upon those patriotic young people that want to join our service, that think that they can contribute to the team that is the joint force that you see sitting up here.
Yeah, I think Roll's hit it. It's desire to serve. That's thing one. We took a page out of the Army's book where they have a soldier prep course for academics and physical fitness. And we've applied that at Great Lakes to great effect. Now, not only do I increase the number of ratings I can go to, but I now had someone invest in me. I mean, I sat down and talked to a bunch of recruits, and they're like, wow, I mean, this instructor taught me how to do X, and I was qualified for 3 ratings. Now I qualify for all ratings. There's one particular individual who scored below 30 on his ADVAB, ended up scoring well into the high 40s, and now is graduated at the top of his class and is in corpsman school. So there's I think, an engagement personally that comes from that. Folks who couldn't pass the PRT, they were 6% above their body fat. With 3 weeks and a person training them how to do that, they're like, hey, I learned some life skills here. So we have to take what we can get as long as they're qualified, and we want to make them better. And we want to make them feel like this organization cares about me, and I want to be part of this organization.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on starting with the willingness and desire to serve. And the onus is on us too, because people still, at the end of the day, want to be part of something bigger than themselves. They want to be part of a winning team. And if they know that they're joining an organization, the Department of Defense, Coast Guard, that is the most modern, lethal, kick-ass joint force in the world, people are still going to want to be a part of that. But the propensity to serve and the eligibility to serve is still moving in the right direction. So the thing that Jim mentioned with the Future Soldier Prep course, that is helping because they have the propensity to serve, but they may have some physical challenges or some cognitive challenges that were not their fault, but they have great aptitude. Can we bring them to our standard and they serve? And what we're finding is they're actually serving at a better rate than a norm. But it's all those things that go together. We were talking behind closed doors here. My son just graduated from Coast Guard boot camp, showed up on his first duty station yesterday morning down in Miami Beach. Tough place to serve. Thank you.
We'll take care of it.
That's just like your force,
Yeah.
right?
Well, I don't want to disparage any of our posts. But he came home after 2 years of college and said, Dad, I want to join the Coast Guard. We typically don't really go hard after that population. We are were a couple years ago, singularly focused on high school seniors.
Yeah.
There's a lot of great people out there that want to serve across a much broader age bracket, so expanding who we go after is important too.
I want to chime in on...
Well, thanks, General, for having your son come and join the Coast Guard. There are 3 Coast Guard flag
We're going to
officers.
find a lot of reasons to go visit him.
Miami. Got a lot going on there. And so there are 3 Coast Guard flag officers whose sons are serving on submarines as we speak too. So it's a team sport. It is fascinating. So you go to Cape May. Or I'm sure you go to Parris Island, you go to Great Lakes, and you just get so excited. about the next generation of folks that are coming into the military. Just top-notch individuals that fit exactly, I think, what you said, Scott. But we're also finding older people wanting to join, individuals who've gone and pursued a career for 2, 3, 5, 10 years, and they don't like it anymore, and they feel like they're at a dead end, or they don't feel good about what they're doing, and the military just provides them a great opportunity to come in and do something great.
So I want to shift gears a little bit we've got a bunch of other questions. One of them is for General Mahoney on autonomous and unmanned platforms and how the Marine Corps is using them at the tactical level. So can you talk a little bit about how you're thinking about research, development, production of unmanned autonomous systems and platforms and overall use on the battlefield, particularly the tactical level, and also, since you're a littoral force too, underwater, surface as well, so not just air, or ground for that matter too.
We've all been talking about the mandate for more autonomy, semi-autonomy, robotic systems, and we're in it to win it. We mentioned Overmatch, Project Convergence, ABMS, all things that are accelerators, DIU, which also accelerates. As far as accelerates those technologies and those platforms. As far as tactical application, right now as we sit here, there's what we call the autonomous low-profile vehicle over in the Western Pacific that takes about a half a day for motor transport marine, just because you picked them, to learn how to operate this thing and drive it to where it needs to go. Autonomy will be built into it, and what this thing can do is it can act as a sensing platform, as a logistics platform, as a fires platform. We call it the narco boat. It's very low freeboard, almost undetectable by radar, and they're cheapest chips. So as a tactical consideration, that's the sort of form factor that we're looking at, the sort of use case that we're looking at across logistics, fires, and sensing. As well, terrestrially, you've heard of our Nemesis system and a leader-follower, where the actual vehicle that fires our naval strike missile has no human in it. It will follow the lead vehicle and deploy itself semi-autonomously or robotically, however you want to define it. Organic precision fires, we're a family of those that we're going after in R&D, one that's man-packable by a Marine or a soldier and can go now out to distances that was previously unheard of. Not 500 meters with a 5.56 at 3145 feet per second. He's out to 20 Ks. So the battlefield has shrunk in that respect. Also a medium version of that sort of thing, probably not man-packable, but man-portable by a team that can now go 50, 60 Ks. So you're not unlimbering a 155, 777 system with all the encumbrance that it comes with logistically. You have these smaller loitering munitions, and we saw the IDF use them to great advantage in Gaza, to where, once again, you've solved you've gotten after a logistic problem. You've gotten after a transport problem with your Marines and soldiers being able to carry them. But now what you have to do is connect that with your targeting and your command and control. So at the tactical level, the technology is there, the systems are there, and we're necking them down. We're going to buy a bunch of them. We got to make sure that we integrate them into our targeting and C2 systems.
From a Navy perspective, thoughts on how you're thinking about the use of UAVs off of ships, DDGs, or aircraft carriers, or UUVs. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I'll say this: you don't have to look at the Chinese. Not particularly good at finding stuff underwater. So it seems like a reasonable step to be increasing our footprint subsurface, because they have challenges there. So how are you thinking about it all?
Well, I think there's a lot of opportunities. So we think about it kind of in increments. I'm focused on January 1st, 2027. So what can we bring to bear to give to Admiral Kaler, who supports Admiral Paparo in the Indo-Pacific, for that fight? That's non-contested sea denial. But the broader view is the integration and migration to a hybrid fleet. to use CCAs off an aircraft carrier that can augment fighters. First step in that for us is MQ-25. Get that tanker up there, get it integrated with the air wing, and open up possibilities for us. From a DDG, you're a little limited to the size and scope of things you can have, but it could be that we've used Scan Eagle, but we don't have to recover it perhaps. There could be a version of an extendable UAS because that ship could be operating alone without the benefit of aircraft to support and paint that picture, and it could sense and provide feedback to that, especially if we're operating in an MCON condition, which we think we will be. So let's explore that area. To me, that opportunity, and those things are relatively small. I mean, we can shoot UASs off submarines, for gosh sakes. So to me, there's no limit here. But that is the work to kind of lay down what does a hybrid fleet look like. And then if I can get my shipbuilding back to where it needs to be and augment it with a hybrid fleet, now I'm talking. And I can deliver that thing in a much more capable manner. So I see integration in air wing first thing with the aviation platform. I think the expanse of the Pacific drives us to think through concept of deployment and concept of employment in addition to concept of operations. I got to do that work because if I want to recall that thing, I want to refuel it, I want to take care of it, I want to have it last and do what it needs to do if it's not attritable. So I've got to work through those things in a expanse of the Pacific Ocean perspective. So I think there's some work to do there still.
So how do you think, from an Air Force perspective, how are you still migrating? We've got F-47, we've got sixth-generation aircraft production now, research, development, production. You've got CCA, you've got teaming. I know it's not an either-or, manned-unmanned, but how are you thinking about what the next couple of years looks like, and how do you partner those kinds of platforms?
Well, so while we kind of, bashed a little bit on acquisition strategies and the current state of acquisitions and the way that the primes lock information and IP, I think CCAs are a perfect example of doing everything at speed and scale. From conceptual idea to airplanes flying autonomously this summer, 2 years. And that's because we opened a market and we didn't just lock into the big primes. We opened up markets and gave opportunities to some of the smaller primes out there, some of those subprimes that have great ideas with innovative technology, adaptive manufacturing, and unbelievable AI skills. And what I think you will see from the Air Force perspective is over the next couple of years, we are going to learn what we don't know. When it comes to that, is it a team? Is it a quarterback style? Is it complete autonomy from a targeting standpoint? Is it mass? Is it attritable? Is it not attritable? And then how we integrate them with the command and control, which is ultimately that will always be one of the linchpins in making sure that you know what you're doing, not from an Air Force perspective, but from the joint perspective. There is no reason that if the Navy can't shoot this at that's not the right thing to do because they're in a better location or they're in a better place. But if you don't want to double target and triple target.
Yeah.
We have a similar approach. I mean, we see great application across all the warfighting functions. But a couple of examples. Traditional view of a swarm, one-way attack, set of drones heading out. But what if those first set that go out, they're nothing but EW jammers? And then the next set that go out, it's an extension of the aerial tier of your network, so it extends everything in terms of what you're able to see. Then the next set are the actual sensors that are locking in a particular target, followed by a swarm of launched effects, one-way attack drones or FPV drones. Dense urban terrain. What's to say that the number one man, number two man, number three man has to be a soldier? Why can't that be a robot? Because we traditionally lose the vast majority. Combined arms breach. Another example of why does that have to be soldiers that are out there executing a combined arms breach? Israel's already demonstrated the ability to fully automate and robotize that particular task.
You want to talk briefly about Coast Guard? And then I've got an audience question for General Mingus after that.
Yeah, thanks. So for us, it's understanding understanding the domain in which we operate. So we talk about maritime domain awareness, but for us, there has to be a step further into a comprehensive understanding and knowledge of what's happening in the domain. Because what the Coast Guard does in terms of like a weapon or a value proposition is a targeted boarding at sea on a target of interest, whether that be a terrorist threat, a smuggler, human smuggling, a search and rescue case, an iceberg, things like that. And so for us, the promise of unmanned really is in domain awareness and sensing, and in the data feeds and the AI behind it that help us comprehensively understand that domain. It's not just unmanned systems in the air, it's also space, and we're doing a lot of work with NGA in that.
Sounds good. General Mingus, question from the audience on the Army's role in the Indo-Pacific. Can you talk about the role of the Army as you see it evolving in the Indo-Pacific, including as part of a joint effort?
Integrated air missile defense, long-range precision fires, which means you have to seize, hold terrain to be able to build up that combat power. The Navy and the Air Force is going to have to help us get in there. The Marines and the Army, given what we're doing in the long-range precision fires, now we can hold maritime targets at risk that help the Navy and the Air Force get closer. But it's going back to that notion of a joint force. None of us can do it by ourselves. And so, in the other component from access, basing, and overflight, the vast majority of our allies and partners in the Indo-Pacific, 80% of every single one of those countries are predominantly land forces. And so the relationships that we as a land force build helps continue to bridge and get us deeper so that we can be in the positions that we need to be if we have to all go.
Follow-up question is also for you on pulling that back to the homeland, but also U.S. territory, including Guam. Your sense of Army's role in, there's been some discussion about Golden Dome and integrated air and missile defense, including for the homeland.
Yeah.
What does that look like?
We're all part of, from space to terrestrial. There's going to be a role for everybody in the Golden Dome. If you look at just the Guam defense architecture by itself, it includes every single one of us sitting at this table that have built that from bottom to top, from space down to terrestrial.
Maybe just for a second to roll back to the first part of Jim's response. I just came from the Philippines, and I know you were over there, Seth, too, with 3MEF. Army, IAMD, Air Force, Naval Strike Missile, low-level ingress with a C-130, Marines belching out these missiles with the Navy targeting for those missiles, happening time last week. So that's just to put an exclamation point on, hey, we're not designed to do it ourselves. We can't do it ourselves, but we're proving that the way we come together and the effects that we can bring to bear, at least through our exercising, are pretty impressive.
If you take just the definition of maneuver by itself at the operational and strategic level, you shoot so that you move, and you move so that you can place more effective fires on the adversary. And all of us, as we think about that incremental approach to seize, to move, so you can place more effective fires on that adversary, is going to take all of us to be able to do that.
On this issue of homeland defense, how have from a Coast Guard perspective, how has your role evolved over the last couple of runs, and if at all, in what you're doing in and around the homeland, supporting priorities on immigration or a range of other homeland defense issues?
Yeah, so obviously there's been a great focus on that, and we've mobilized additional resources in areas where we're just seeing high vectors of illicit activity. Southern California, Mexico, in the Caribbean, in the southeast approaches to Florida, we're moving more resources and more different types of resources there. I mean, we have an obligation to control and secure the border against illicit activity there. We're doing a lot more with deployable support forces, and we're helping CBP, for example, in the Rio Grande with some Coast Guard forces there as well. And we have a lot more of our more highly specialized teams, like maritime safety and security teams, that are integrating into sort of the standard operations to provide more capability for the operational commander to stop the flow. But it sort of shows you the dynamic tension the Coast Guard experiences in terms of homeland security and, if necessary, homeland defense, and then supporting combatant commanders and what they may need to do in a contingency. And what we also have to prepare for and that we're working on is, in a contingency, we have an obligation to Transcom and others to protect port facilities that are I guess that when you said the magazine, our supply in the magazine, and that's not just physical, that's in cyberspace, and we're integrated with U.S. Cyber Command to help do that.
Here's it's a tough question for General Mahoney.
Good.
7.
Good.
No, 6.
21. 5.
Blue.
The U.S. military is dependent on certain critical minerals and metals whose extraction and processing in particular is controlled by our adversaries. It's been a focus of the administration on critical minerals. How serious of a challenge is this? And what, just more broadly, can we do to help mitigate that vulnerability?
When I would fire an AIM-9 off of an F-18, the front of that thing had a piece of sensor in there called indium antimonide. And that is supplied almost solely from the People's Republic of China. I just saw an article the other day that went down on a bar graph of all the rare earth metals, and it's 100%, 90%, 89% supplied by the Chinese. I think we have one mine in the United States. There's some in South America, but the fact is the market is cornered, and you can see it being used as a geopolitical hammer right up as late as last week. But in just about every weapon system we have, those rare earths are required for magnets, for sensors, for other pieces of kit that make it work. And if we're beholden to someone, especially the PRC, that is not a good strategic position to be in.
Anybody else on critical minerals?
I agree.
We all face the same thing.
Yeah.
Yep. So, question for you from an Army perspective. I promise General Fenton did not ask me to ask you this question. However, I was down at Soft Week last week, and I wonder if
Do I need to drink some water before?
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about if you could bring the SOF community in. You've got Green Berets, you've got Rangers, you've got others. What is your sense about how the SOF community plays, and one could bring in the SEALs and others, into this broader discussion, because they've sort of been absent from what we've been talking about? What role do you see them playing, including in the sort of major power competition? How much do they really need to shift gears from SEALs involved in land targeting to much more active in the Indo-Pacific for the SEALs? But for you on the Army side, what's the evolution that the SOF community needs to continue to go in dealing with some of these major powers from the CT fight we were involved in?
Yeah, from my perspective, Brian Fenton, Rich Clark before him, Tony Thomas before him, Votel, they've all been on a path to realize that specifically honed in on a CT instability fight is not where the future needs to be. And so I think SOCOM writ large has done the things they need to do to outpace. We all play in what we call the continuum of conflict, from campaigning to crisis to conflict. SOF has an outsized impact in campaigning, and they have an outsized impact in a crisis and a conflict. For the numbers that they have and the things that they bring, expands exponentially our capabilities, whether it's getting deep to be able to access targets for us, whether it's building partner capacity, whether it's doing direct action. They enable all of the joint force and give an outsized impact and expand what we are able to do. And oh, by the way, in case folks didn't pick up on it, our prankster, that was a Monty Python and the Holy Grail joke, in case for those who are too old to catch that.
I did get that. I don't know if most people...
The cadets in the front row don't know what you just said.
If a joke's funny, you shouldn't have to explain.
That's true. That's true. Or we're all too old to be the only ones that know.
Someone was starting to come in. I don't know. I've lost track of this. I knew at some point I would lose control. I think we've gotten to that point. We're right near the end. I don't know. Both.
I want to come back on SEALs though for a second, because they're on the same path, transitioning from a fight that they fought very well and capably to a blue water edition. Seabed warfare tremendous opportunity for us there with our SEAL teams and our submarine forces for an insertion exercise. They can do a lot of things in phase 0 and in the transition that are really important for us from a targeting perspective as well.
Yep.
So I think there's a huge potential here for all special forces to do exactly what General Mingus said.
And I find the chief and I both tap into John Braga and Kit down in the 70th. They're some of our leaders in innovation because they're able to spin things much faster. They pass those lessons, so we all benefit from that innovation as well.
Do you see the same thing with the Air Force Special Operations Community?
Absolutely. I mean, if you ever want to look at a good acquisition strategy, go talk to the folks in Special Ops. They don't mess around. They need it, they want it, they get it as fast as you possibly can, and if it's not right, they buy another one. And they get something, they iterate, it is the epitome of doing iteration upon iteration because they don't have the time to wait around for a program of record the way that we think of it from a big acquisition strategy. And I completely agree that their oversized play in campaigning and conflict is absolutely unmatched, pound for pound, unbelievable.
So, General Mahoney, last question, then I will hand this over to John Hamre, we started off by talking about the competitive landscape that the U.S. sits in. Can you just talk about how important the ally and partner dimension and how you see this? This could be anything from basing to access and placement to, partner capacity in a warfight that may be critical for deterrence. Where do you see and how do you fit allies and partners into this mix?
Yeah, I think in the general big scheme of things, that is one of the greatest advantages that we have. Whether it's a formal alliance, whether it's all the different dimensions of working with allies and working with partners that you just mentioned. They also enable forward posture for us. We always want to play an away game, and without those alliances, without the ability to use their capabilities and their spaces, we're at a deficit. We're relying on extremely long lines of communication and time that is not on our side if we're talking in particular about a PRC eventuality in Taiwan. So the lever of allies and partners is indispensable from the get-go. It enables us to cheat time, to cheat distance, to stay forward, and when we go to the fight, hopefully to be shoulder to shoulder with us, to add capability, add capacity. And frankly, when you back off and you look at it from a political standpoint, it gives any adversary a number of different problems that they have to deal with. They can't just deal monolithically with one political system, with one resourcing system, with one they have to deal with a multiplicity of them, and I think that's an advantage as well.
Well, and you can see it when you look at the landscape of the U.S., whether it's our Navy forces at 5th Fleet in Yokosuka, whether it's the 3rd MEF in Okinawa, whether it's the Air Force at Kadena Air Force Base, whether it's our forward deployed forces in Korea. We got a lot of friends in the region where we've got forces, and I suspect I know the Chinese are well aware of our presence around their neighborhood. Well, I just want to thank everyone for sticking with us. We did save the best panel for last. I want to thank you all for some great questions. We got to some of them, but not all of them. But if you can join me in thanking this esteemed crew for 2 years in a row.